So welcome to the afternoon. All right, so it's after lunch and all that kind of good stuff. So hopefully you're ready for a little bit of interactiveness today. So hope you all noticed there is that word interactive in the title. So we might do maybe an exercise or so as we get through today. But really what I wanted to talk about was some insights for some practices that you can use if you've got a Agile-Waterfall hybrid environment. A little bit about my background is I'm fairly new to Pega. I've been here for about 5 months, but for the previous 9 years, I've been helping basically Fortune 500 companies make that leap from more of a waterfall approach into more of an agile approach. And so a lot of the things that we're going to bring to the table are experiences that we've had and things that will hopefully be tried and true, some things that you might want to have for some next steps back at your organization. And so what we're going to start off with today is to get, for me to know you and for you to know the other folks that are in the room. So we're going to do a little bit of demographics. Then we're going to talk about, hey, what's your problem? And then after that, we're going to get into some tips and tricks. The good news is that this presentation actually has about 2 hours worth of content. Woohoo! But I'm going to tailor my content to what you all want to know. And hence, that's why I'm going to ask you, what's the problem? So I can tailor it. When you do get the slides, and I believe that they're going to be made available to you as part of an email, you can go to the email, you can get the PDF there. You'll see all the content that we might be focusing in just on an area or two of the slide deck. Also setting some more expectations. I'd like to kind of lower them just a little bit. This is a 40-minute session. I would love to solve all your Agile-Waterfall problems. But chances are we're not going to get to all your problems today. But I'm hoping that we can get some tips and tricks for you so you can have some ideas of where to start when you get back to your organization today. All right? And of course, I'm going to have some cards here in case you want to follow up afterwards. I am going to be hanging around at 4 o'clock, and in case you just want to have a one-on-one chat, we can get through some of those things here. All right, so let's see. How you doing? Okay, so this is the other interactive portion of today. You already did the stand-up, but I'm gonna build off of that today. So I'd like for you to stand and remain standing if your agency right now, in all or just a part, are using Waterfall right now. So nobody else is using Waterfall right now. Okay, so the next question gets even more fun if you're using Agile and Waterfall. All right, so stand and remain standing if you're using Agile right now. All right, so what are you folks using back there? Are you using Agile approaches and things like that? Yeah, so Pega. Chances are Pega is using Agile, so you should stand up.
Go on, Steve.
Yeah, Pega does use Agile. All right, so it sounds like folks here, we've got a mixed audience here when it comes to using Agile. So I'd like to kind of get a sense for what flavors of Agile you're using. Yes, there is more than one flavor of Agile. So raise your hand high if you're using Scrum. You would know if you're using it. We've got just a handful here. Okay, great, yay, thanks Pega guys. Yes, you are using Scrum. All right, Kanban. Okay, couple folks. Anything else? Lean Startup? You would know these if you would know it? Okay, other Agile approaches? Okay, so just looking on your faces, you're just like, this could be an interesting conversation here today. Let me get a sense of how well things are going at your organization. I want you to give me a 5 if, we're going to do voting here, it's called Fist of 5 voting. I'm going to give you a 5 if things are going awesome, high 5, we're a model, all projects are going awesome, everything is on track. A 3 is, some good, some not so good. A 1 is I'm literally on fire right now. I don't even know why I'm sitting in this chair. If you use a 1, be careful of what finger you use when you vote. That's all I'm asking. Okay, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 and vote. Okay, 1, 2, 3, vote. Let me see your hands. All right, saying 3s, 4s, 5s, 3s, 3s. Okay, and a couple 1s back there. Okay, so the good news is that you're in good company. On average, it looks like we got about a 3. Now, remember how I said I was going to tailor this conversation to what your needs are? Well, this is what our first exercise is going to be. And so we have some note cards that are going to be going around, and maybe I can have some help from our wonderful announcer here passing out some note cards. What I'd like for you to do is find a group of around 3 or 4 people. This will be the interactive part of today's workshop. Introduce yourself to your 3 or 4 folks, and what I want you to do is come up with a list of what are your largest challenges with your hybrid Agile-Waterfall approach at your organization. What's your problem? Where are the challenges? And I'd like for you to put 1 challenge per card. 1 challenge per card. If you need a stack of cards, we can get you a stack of cards. But 1 challenge per card. So again, 1 challenge per card. Get in a group of 3 or 4 folks, share, and I give you about 4 minutes to do that. Okay? About 4 minutes. We'll see you then. Gonna make them think a little bit. Yes. Awesome. Thank you. See how they're already. All right, so let's go ahead and pull it back together. I'm so glad to see that you guys got into some groups. It sounded like several folks are going like, yes, let's talk about the problems. Let's start and go from there. So thank you for doing that. All right, so we can start getting ourselves and making ourselves a little backlog of things that we're going to talk about today. I'd like for maybe a group or two to share what was one of their top 1 or 2 issues that they were popping up with their current environment. So can I have a brave volunteer offer one of their problems? Awesome, thank you.
Hi, so I'll start with talking about the culture and moving from waterfall to agile.
Yep.
So we talked about accountability and authority,
Okay.
things that in an agile environment, all of the staff have that.
Okay.
So that was like one of the biggest challenges that we talked about.
Was it more along the lines of roles and responsibility? I was going to say disclarity or unclear with the roles and responsibilities?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Can I get 1 or 2 more, please? Looks like over here.
So one of the things we struggle with is the misunderstanding of what agile actually really means. Some people seem to think that it just means that you are delivering a product every 3 weeks, when in essence it doesn't necessarily have to mean you're delivering. You could be going through the cycle of building and testing, designing, but holding the deployment until the other pieces are ready.
Mm-hmm.
So in our environment, when we did that, we went to an agile methodology for all our O&M, and what it did for the customer couldn't keep up with all the things that we were delivering. However, management wanted us to do this 3-week rollout, thinking that was going to solve a bunch of problems, when in essence it actually created some more problems.
Absolutely, yeah, I hear that a lot. And we actually have a section on release planning that we can throw in there and talk about that today as well. All right, 1 more. We're building the backlog of what you want to talk about. And of course, on the way other side of the room, as she does that.
So we talked about scope and often how difficult it can be for people who have worked in waterfall for many years to find a minimum viable product and prioritize their business requirements. So often it's difficult to understand that you're not going to get everything all at once. You're going to get it in pieces, and you're going to have to decide what is the most important thing for you to have at this moment.
Yes. Yeah, there was actually one client I was with not too long ago. When you took a look at their totality of their entire backlog, let's just say they had 100 items in their backlog, literally 90 of them were MVP. And so I'm like, well, clearly, 90 out of 100 doesn't mean it's MVP. So it's that concept of chunking things out that tends to be a bit of a challenge, especially in a hybrid environment. So I think when we also talk about the release planning aspects, we'll throw some of that in there. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, what you guys just did and what you all just experienced was the first tip and trick I want you to leave this workshop with here today, is an idea of how to create a backlog of items for you to start working through. And this is an exercise that I really love to do, especially with what I call a task force, or a small group that is responsible for enabling Agile to work at your organization. It's typically something that's cross-functional, so it's not just an IT portion of things. It includes the business, includes quality, includes how you're going to release things. So you're going to have this cross-functional group of folks who are going to work between teams. Notice how I'm not saying they're sitting above teams, because that implies that they have something that's more important than the others. Their customers in this task force team are the teams, and making those teams successful. So they need to come up with that backlog of stuff that they can work through and relentlessly focus on and to enable this, quote, hybrid environment or Agile work for you as they go through this journey into Agile. And so what you want to do is you want to create this backlog of items, and we've literally done it with index cards. Now what you can do with your index cards is once you brainstorm through a set of these is you can start to prioritize, move things up and down. And it's very quick, it's very easy, and there's something, I'll tell you, just very tactical. When you do things by hand on cards, there's something about that that makes it a lot more real, and you can feel it more. And so that's a technique that I really like to use in order to prioritize a small backlog. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pick the top one off the list, focus in on that. That's called limiting your work in process. And then you're going to pilot a solution with a team. You're going to get some feedback with a team on whether or not that solution is actually going to work. Then you're going to decide whether or not you're going to expand it, alter it, change it, throw it away, do something with it. Try not to do it across the entire organization all at once in your first bang. Pilot it, get some information, see if it's going to work before you expand. So this technique right here is one of those that I want you to leave this room with here today, is to do that piloting technique with a small group working off a prioritized list. Because all those concepts right there, in fact, demonstrate your knowledge and your understanding of how to apply Agile within an organization. Now, just to kind of touch on some of the other things that I heard, that we don't really know what Agile means. You know, is it a methodology? Is it more of a philosophy? I tend to be somewhere that's in between. I tend to be an Agile practitioner that tends to be a little bit more practical as opposed to very hardcore, you must do it exactly this way. And what that means is that the process, the tools, and things like that, to me, are secondary. What's more important to me is whether or not we act within what they call the Agile Manifesto principles. There's 4 of them, and you can't come to an Agile discussion without looking at these 4 here. Basically, the way that you read this is that there's 2 sets of words. The ones on the right have some importance to them, but the ones on the left have greater value. So the way that you would read, like, for example, the first one is that there's greater value in interactions and individuals over processes and tools. Yes, there is value in process. Yes, there is value in tools. But there's greater value in individuals and interactions. And what I find is in organizations, they tend to like things that are more towards the right side. Organizations that tend to be more waterfall tend to like things such as process and tools, comprehensive documentation, contract negotiations, establishing and following a plan without changes. They tend to like those things. And when you start introducing more of the Agile approaches, which is the left-hand side of those things, where it's all about individuals, interactions, collaboration, working software as a measure of progress, and responding to change, that tends to be in conflict. And so if you have this task force that's working together to look at these 4 things and to solve some of these issues, it's going to help you. It's going to help you. When we start talking about Scrum, the reason why I'm talking about Scrum, which is just one flavor of Agile, Scrum is used by just roughly almost 60% of all Agile implementations use Scrum exclusively. That's why I like to talk about this one here. But it's based off of 3 things: inspect, adapt, and be transparent. And when you take a look at a waterfall, they try to build all those things in, and you do things at various stages and various milestones and things of that nature. But we also kind of do that within Agile. But the way that these 3 things happen is in a completely different way, and that tends to make folks uncomfortable. And so what we're going to try to do here is kind of mishmash these 2 things together to get to a successful product out the door and satisfy our customers with high value. And so when you start thinking about that transition, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at, instead of individual efficiencies and trying to get myself at 100%, 100%, 100%, I'm going to look at the effectiveness of an organization. The effectiveness of an organization. And that just takes that kind of different mindset in order to do that. And so when you have that mindset, what we find very quickly is that just doing Agile is much more than an IT thing. it's going to impact your customers. It's going to impact, how you release. It's going to impact the value that you bring to your organization. And so when you make this decision to, quote, go Agile, it's going to impact a lot more than just the IT folks. And so it's going to be shifting from what I've traditionally seen, more that control and command and control approach, to creating that environment by which things can be successful. And that's how you're going to be successful in ensuring that you have a hybrid Agile waterfall environment where things are going to be successful. The other thing that I like to see, or that I don't like to see, but the thing that I see quite frequently is they pick one, either Agile or waterfall, and they try to make one and they force it into the other. So let's say that you have a waterfall heavy approach. They try to take principles of Agile and force it into what they have existing for waterfall. I've seen it the other way around too, saying we have to go Agile, we have to go Agile, we have to go Agile. So you over here in Agile, and they start forcing the waterfall things into Agile. How well do you think that's going to work? It's not going to work. So I'm saying you need to take a look at both. Each has their own benefits, each has their own drawbacks. What you need to do is for your organization figure out what's working for you from each one of these approaches. Take the best from both, approach it and try it with a pilot team. See if the mashup of those couple things work for your team. If that works for that one team, then start expanding out that way. So if you try, pilot, get some more information, and then expand out, that's going to be a much more successful transition for you than trying just to do it everybody all at once in kind of a big bang approach. Now, when I say these types of things, people are saying yes, 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 but I want you to understand that from both the waterfall side and the Agile side, you both are going to have to change. You both are going to have to change. And as what we heard from one of the panelists this morning, I thought this was actually quite brilliant. Whenever anybody needs to change, there's going to be a sense of loss. You're going to have to work through that. You're going to have to work through that. And the way that you do that is to have a good change management and a good communication plan. Hence, again, why you need a good task force who can help do these messages for you, who can help do that for you. So some considerations that you have with that. Now, in the deck that you're going to get, it's going to actually talk about multiple different topics, syncing up teams, what to do with product, how to keep stakeholders up to date and things of that nature. My caution for you is, and in any Agile book will tell you this, is that be careful of just taking any one of these, lifting, shifting, and trying it to apply it to your organization as is. Be very cautious of that. I want you to be inspired by some of these things and do some more research outside of this little presentation here and pick the best that's going to work for your situation. That's why Agile works, is because if you go against those 4 Agile Manifesto statements and you're true to that, these other things are going to fall out. So use these things as inspiration, but do the critical thinking necessary for your organization so you can pilot it, try it, get some information, and then make a decision going on from there. And of course, in order for this to happen, you actually have to have an empowered task force. It can't just be a group of folks, a group of misfits off to the side saying, hey, these are things that we want to change. If they don't have the power to make those changes, they're not going to be able to do these things moving forward. And I've seen that happen before as well. So from a team perspective, since we didn't have a lot of questions on this, I'm going to go through this very quickly. Whenever I take a look at doing a hybrid environment, I take a look at a couple different scaling models. Now, Pega doesn't have a preference or endorse any one type of scaling model. There's the LESS model, which is Large Scale Scrum Framework. The website less.works is there. You can get more information about that. It's about getting groups of folks synced up at the end and the starts of each sprint. You have the SAFE framework, and this is going to be an eye chart. But basically, the way that you read this is starting from the bottom up. You've got teams and programs, how teams and programs work together. And then you get into a value stream. And then on top of that, you've got a whole bunch of different ways of how you set a portfolio. What we do is we use these as inspiration pieces for us to figure out what's going to work for our organization. And there's great things about each one of these bits and pieces. As a case study, one of the projects that I was basically the program manager for is we had 5 teams. 3 of them were Scrum, 2 of them were Waterfall. And they were in a 2-week cadence. And what we did is at the end of every 2 weeks, we would have a mandatory integration at the end of 2 weeks for the folks that were part of the Scrum teams. If the Waterfall teams happened to have something that they also wanted to integrate, it wasn't required, they could. Now, did they actually have stuff at the end of the first one for these 2 teams? They did not, because they were still in requirements mode, right? They wouldn't get into more of development until the end of the second and the end of the third sprint. But whatever they had, they started to integrate along the way. So by the time we got to the end of the build cycle after 4 sprints, that actual integration went much easier. And so you can use this approach of mandatory integrations for the Scrum teams, but opportunistically for those that are not on Scrum, those that are in Waterfall, for those folks that have working software, you can fold those in. And then what we did after that is we did a 4-week hardening phase where, okay, now that we have the code from all 5 teams together, it's the final integrations, the final testings, and things of that nature. As that work was tapering down, we started to taper up into the next release. And so in this case here, we made the conscious decision not to release after every 2 weeks. In the case of what we heard from here is you guys were being forced to release every 3 weeks. Our customers, our clients couldn't handle it every 2 weeks. They could barely handle once a quarter. That was still a stretch. So again, this is one of those things that we modified to make sure that we could have a release cadence that was going to work with our clients and the teams all together. And that's going to be an important thing there. So I'm going to keep bypassing all of this. Okay, keeping product in sync. So I think this is where I heard some of the conversation of some of the problem areas from today. Release roadmaps. I'm a huge fan of a release roadmap. And I'm going to go over an example here very shortly. But basically what I really like about release roadmaps is that they help focus and they help gain consensus around a direction or around a vision. And this is especially true if you have multiple people who are involved, or multiple departments, or multiple partners, or multiple subcontractors, to help set that vision and help set that direction moving forward. I believe I also heard another one of the panelists this morning say that they do this, is they like to get the overall vision of some things first, and then start chunking it out. So as a dispersed group where you've got bits and parts of work that are being handled by different parts of organizations, both within and by subcontractors, you can kind of keep in sync. And those types of things. The big caution I want to have here is, and I didn't hear this from this morning, is that the roadmap is not a contract. Because you're going to get to the end of, let's say, your quarterly build, and you're going to learn things. Whether it's the technology, whether or not your technology can solve your problem, or you're going to learn that whether or not your product is actually solving the problem that you're having. You're going to get feedback along the way. So you're going to need to take that feedback, put it back into your roadmap, and go through this again. You may turn it into a quarterly activity of making sure that you're not only technically are solving the problem, but you're actually solving the problem that has value. And whenever you start taking a look at a release, what I want to make sure is that we're doing a nice vertical chunk going across multiple areas. The example that I have here is, front end, middle layer, and back end. I want to make sure I hit all of those layers and deliver value up and down a stack, as opposed to building things in just components. We know that whenever we release something, if you're just within a component, it's much easier and much quicker to actually solve those quality problems. The more difficult quality problems happen when you integrate across layers. So when you try to get that whole integrated solution end to end, that's where we have the most problems. So I want to make sure that when we chunk up work, that we be sure that we hit all of those layers and have an end-to-end solution as opposed to just a layer solution. And so if you want to think about it from a cake perspective, just because I really like cake, you're going to do slices of cake at a time as opposed to individual layers at a time. All right, so think about when you create your releases, do it as a layer, as a slice of cake. This is the format that I like. The first section that you have at the top is just the release date. The next one is the title. The next one down is the theme. Who are you doing this for? And the last one down is the list of features. I'm not going to go through this example here in too much detail, but what this shows here is this iterative and incremental build of getting a solution out the door. You're starting out with a nice vertical stack with one particular client set. The next release is building upon that, automating it, adding more clients to it, getting a wider release ready in the third release, and by the time we get to the fourth release, it's a wide release, and then you're starting to look into the next technology of how you're going to release. Now, to kind of keep all of these things in sync, what I really like from the SAFe model is the concept of the 2-day release planning workshop. They call it a PI planning. This is what we've used in the past with several organizations where you've got more than 5 teams, but less than 12. More than 5 teams, less than 12. This seems to work really well when you're kind of in that 8-team area. What we do is we do a show and tell in the morning of here's what we did in the last release. Here are the highlights of what those things are. We've got the product owners come up and say, okay, our strategy is, we're reconfirming the strategy. We go off to lunch. We come back after lunch, and then we start kind of looking at all the different features and all the different epics that we're looking at. And at the end of the day, that's when I have the executives come in and say, hey, this is what we talked about today, to kind of get their feedback along the way. The next day kind of gets into some sizing, validating some sizing, going to lunch, come back and say, does this make sense? Does this make sense? Can this be realistically done in a 3-month time period? Reconcile and tweak, and then have your executive read out at the end. I go old school when I do this. We would go into a system, so like you can go into a tool such as PMF, which is the project management framework tool that we use within Pega. You can print out all the stories, cut them up, we'll lay them out on tables. What you see right here is actually 5 6-foot tables end to end, and we had 3 sets of those. So we had 90 linear feet of requirements. And the way that we did our planning is that each team is color-coded. You'll see color-coded sticky notes is we would use a 1-week person effort per sticky note. So if you had a team that had, let's say, 5 people on it, and you had 10 weeks worth of build, that's 50 sticky notes. Oh, here, wait a second. We have some things going on. Somebody's getting married. Give me 4 sticky notes back. Oh, we've got some training and some mandatory compliance. Everybody on the team, give me 5 back. And you start discounting and taking the sticky notes back. You're going to end up with a smaller amount of sticky notes. And then what you do is on each of the cards that you see here, each card represents a story, or I should say an epic, is you start putting your allocations of, okay, I think this one is going to take 2 people for a week. Okay, I think this one is going to take 3 people for a week. Okay, this one's going to take 1 person for a week. You're going to run out of sticky notes. When you run out of sticky notes, you're done. Your capacity is done. And so you'll notice on this table right here, and this is just one table, only sticky notes were placed on the first 1 or 2 tables worth. There were no sticky notes on tables 2 and tables 3. Wow, that was a conversation we had in terms of setting expectations of what would go into a release. And so you can start some of the negotiations. And so again, some of the teams were doing Agile, some of the teams were doing Waterfall. It didn't matter. This is the work that was going in to this particular 3-month chunk release. And we would do this every 3 months. We would do this every 3 months. And it kind of set a cadence. I'll tell you, the first 2 times are painful doing this. The first 2 times of this are painful. But by the time we got to the 3rd one, by the time we got to the 4th one, they didn't need me as a facilitator anymore. They knew what to do. They knew the conversations to have. But this is a great technique that you can do to at least get on the same page of what goes into a release And again, it doesn't matter if it's Agile or Waterfall, this is the effort that you have. And this can kind of say, okay, now we're going to start getting into that first model that I had, showing, okay, these are the 3 Scrum teams, these are the 2 other teams that are using Waterfall and divvying out the work that way. The other thing that we did is we started to do, I'm going to go through this really quickly because I want to show the calendar, some lovely animation. Okay, so if you think of a traditional 2-week calendar where you've got Scrum teams that are going on, what would happen is every Monday, we would have all the product owners get together every Monday at the beginning of the week. And what they would do is they would take a look at stuff that was done in the past sprint, what's going on now, and looking forward to the next sprint. So it was kind of like, are we still getting value from the past? How are we doing now? What do we need to do in the future? So we'd have that conversation, and it would be one product owner or somebody that represents the business from each of the teams. Now, we would have 3 teams, had 3 product owners for the 3 Scrum teams, but we would also have somebody representing the business for the 2 Waterfall teams. So we had 5 people in this meeting, plus the product manager, the person who oversaw all the product owners. So once a week, this group of 6 got together to kind of take a look at past, present, and future. And then what they would do is the next day is they would review that with the actual Scrum teams and what they were working on. And you'll notice on the calendar here, this is in the off week of the 2 major ceremonies, starting and ending of a sprint. And what this did is it just established Tuesday is, this is the day as a whole organization, we're just going to all get on the same page. But of course, there was some preparation that needed to be done Monday before we got to Tuesday. And when everybody got together on that Tuesday, midway through the sprint, it gave you a whole week to have conversations with who you had dependencies on to try to resolve those before you got into planning the next time. The dependencies could be within the team, between Scrum teams, between a Scrum and Agile Waterfall, a Scrum and a Waterfall team, between any one of those teams and teams outside of your program. It gave you a full week to figure out where those dependencies were and whether or not you needed to make adjustments to user stories, your release plan, blah, 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 before you got into the next planning cycle. So you can use a cadence, something like this, to kind of keep everything in sync when it comes to releases and things of that nature. All right? So a couple techniques that you can use. I'm going to go through a lot of these things here, keeping stakeholders involved. I just want to share some of the information with you so when you look at the slides later, you kind of know what these are. When you start looking at metrics, you do have to look at metrics and how you communicate metrics out a little bit differently. Huge fan of some charts and things of that nature. Governance, you're also going to need to take a look at. And so if you got questions on governance, we can give you kind of some ideas on what to do with that. And also when it comes to change management, there's lots of things that you can do with change management. Again, my intention wasn't to go over this here today. My intention here was to say there's more information in here for you, okay? And if you've got more information, more questions on that, feel free to come up afterwards. Also, we also have a lovely Using Pega for Agile Government here available for you. We've got a couple things here, but you can also get this downloaded off of our website. So lots of resources here for you to take a look at. So hopefully I've answered a few of the questions here today. The biggest thing and the biggest key takeaway, I'm going to fast forward here pretty quickly, is this right here. Really establish your Agile Waterfall task force. Again, it's those 7 ± 2 people who are going to help you transition from an individual or a departmental efficiency perspective into more of a overall organizational effectiveness model. This is going to impact beyond IT. Don't force one to work on the other. You are going to have to do something new. Use practices from here or others as inspiration, but use your critical thinking to figure out what you want to do for your next step. Experiment, learn, adapt, and repeat. And I love the expression, expand responsibly, and use your critical thinking for that. With that, I'm out of my time box, but I'm more than happy to remain up here to answer any questions for those folks that have questions. So with that, any closeout that you'd like to do?
I tell you, he was a wild and crazy guy. So, any questions? I mean, what I love to have everybody think about, especially all the government agencies here, is really think about all the points that Steve pointed out. Agile, I think the young lady here from FBI, yep, when she made her question, she's like, what is Agile? And understanding Agile. And I hope that Steve has shared a lot more points to make you have a better understanding, that take back to the agency and say, hey, I have a better understanding, and get with your, the Pega account guys and the technical team to really make you guys dive into it. Don't be afraid. The water's not that deep. So, in the waterfall it is, but on the Agile side, it's not that deep. So, are there any questions for Steve? He's a brilliant mind. It's great to have him at Pega, and please engage him after this session. It's phenomenal guy. So let's give him another round of applause.
Thank you.
So what we're going to do, we're going to take another 15-minute break, and we'll be in with our last session. You don't want to miss this last session. It's going to be very, very interactive, okay? Even more so than what the wild and crazy guy Steve Martin did. Thank you, guys.